I never imagined the day would come when the very house I poured my heart, my life savings, and my love into would become the place where my son looked me in the eye and told me to leave. It was supposed to be a dream come true, the culmination of years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of careful planning and saving. I had promised myself long ago, when I was still raising him with barely 2 pennies to rub together, that one day he would never have to struggle the way I did. That promise became the reason I worked overtime shifts, the reason I wore the same old shoes year after year, the reason I stayed awake at night wondering how much longer I could hold everything together. And when the chance finally came, I did it. I handed him the keys to his dream house. But what happened after that still haunts me, because in that very same house, the house that carried my blood and sweat in every brick, my son, the boy I raised, the boy I believed I knew better than anyone else, told me to leave as if I were a stranger trespassing in his world. Do you know what it feels like to stand in the doorway of something you built? Something you gave, only to be told you don't belong? I'll tell you. It feels like the floor beneath you gives way. It feels like the years of sacrifice shatter in a single breath. But before I reveal the words he used, the words that cut me deeper than any blade could, you need to understand how we got here, because none of this happened overnight. It began years before, with choices I made, choices I thought were for the good of my family, and with blind trust in a son I believed would always carry me in his heart. And if you think this story ends with me quietly leaving, you are wrong, because what came next was something no one in my family ever saw coming. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on the house. It was a sprawling 2-story home, perched on a quiet cul-de-sac with manicured lawns and tall oak trees. The kind of place you drive past and whisper to yourself, one day, maybe. I had never imagined it would be within reach. Not for me, at least. But when my son's eyes lit up as we toured it, I knew this wasn't just a house. To him, it was everything he ever dreamed of. And because I wanted to give him everything, I told him I'd make it happen. He was hesitant at first. "Mom, it's too much. I can't ask you to do this," he said. But I brushed it off with a smile. Mothers don't wait to be asked. They give, because that is what love feels like when it has lived through storms. What he didn't know was how much it would cost me, not just in money, but in pieces of myself I would never get back. I liquidated savings I had been holding onto for my retirement. I sold jewelry that had been in our family for generations. I gave up the small comforts I had finally allowed myself after decades of self-denial. And when I finally wrote that last check, when the house officially became his, I thought I was giving him not just a home, but proof that I believed in his future. For a while, it felt like I had done the right thing. He was happy. He threw parties. He invited friends. He walked through those halls with a pride that warmed my heart. And I felt welcome. I felt like I had earned a place there, too. Not as the owner, but as the mother who made it possible. But slowly, something began to change. I noticed it in small things at first. The way his wife would glance at me when I lingered too long in the kitchen. The way conversations would pause when I entered the room. The subtle distance in my son's tone when I asked if I could come by. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that they were just busy, that every family has seasons of closeness and distance. But the truth was more bitter than I could admit at the time. They didn't want me there. And the night it all came crashing down, I realized just how deep that rejection went. It was a dinner I will never forget. I had cooked one of his favorite meals, the same recipe he begged me for as a boy whenever he had a hard day. I thought it would be a way to reconnect, a way to remind him of the bond we once had. I set the table with care, poured the wine, and waited with a hopeful smile. But the moment he walked in, I felt it. A heaviness, a tension I couldn't explain. And when we finally sat down, he didn't touch his plate. He didn't even look at me. He just cleared his throat, exchanged a glance with his wife, and said words I never thought I'd hear from him. "Mom, I think it's time you stop coming around so much. This is our house now, and we need space." I froze. At first, I thought I had misheard him, that maybe there was a gentler meaning beneath the sharpness of those words. But then he looked me dead in the eye, his tone firmer this time, and repeated, This is not your home. You need to leave." And in that instant, the world went black. The house, the sacrifices, the years of love, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by the cold reality of his rejection. But what he didn't know was that his words lit a fire inside me, because if he thought he could push me out of the very home I gave him, he had forgotten something. Everything in that house had come from me, and I wasn't about to walk away empty-handed. I remember the day so vividly. My son Daniel had finally moved into his dream house, the one I paid for. The walls gleamed fresh white. The marble floors reflected every shadow, and the scent of new wood still lingered in the air. He invited me over for what he called a housewarming dinner. The word sounded sweet at first, but inside me a small uneasiness stirred. A mother's instinct never lies. Still, I convinced myself that perhaps this would be the evening where gratitude would shine through. After all, this house was not just bricks and mortar. It was my blood, sweat, and lifetime of savings. I had poured every ounce of my heart into giving him what I never had. I put on my favorite dress, a soft blue one Daniel used to compliment when he was younger. I even baked his favorite apple pie to carry with me. Tonight, I thought, I'll finally feel like I belong in my son's world again. When I arrived, the driveway was already full of shiny cars I didn't recognize. His friends, his wife's family, neighbors I had never met, all laughing, glasses of champagne in hand, as if the world revolved around this mansion. As I walked in, carrying my pie, heads turned, but not with warmth. It was as if I was an uninvited guest in a place that had my fingerprints in every corner. Daniel rushed over, but instead of the proud, loving hug I expected, he looked nervous, almost embarrassed. His wife Claire followed him, her eyes sharp, scanning me from head to toe like I was out of place in the marble palace. "Mom," Daniel whispered, trying not to draw attention. "I'm glad you came, but let's keep tonight light. All right, no talk about the house. No talk about the house." The word stung. Why would I mention it? I didn't come to boast. I came because I thought this was family. Dinner began, and I sat quietly at the edge of the long dining table, watching them laugh, toast, and make plans for vacations and renovations as if I wasn't even there. No one acknowledged my pie. No one asked me to speak. I was invisible in a home I paid for. Then came the breaking point. Claire stood up, clinking her glass. "We just want to thank everyone for supporting us in this incredible journey," she said with a radiant smile. "Daniel and I worked so hard to make this dream come true. It's finally ours." The word sliced through me like a knife. Worked so hard. Ours? I sat frozen, waiting, praying for Daniel to speak up, to say even one word that his mother had helped, that none of this would have been possible without her. But he said nothing. He just smiled and raised his glass, soaking in the applause, the admiration, the envy of his friends. In that moment, my world tilted. I realized the truth I had been too blind to see. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately erased. After dinner, when everyone drifted toward the backyard for drinks, Daniel pulled me aside. His voice was low, cold, and final. "Mom, listen. I don't want you bringing up the fact that you bought this house. It makes Claire uncomfortable. From now on, this is our home, and I think it's best if you don't come by too often. We'll visit you, all right?" My knees nearly buckled. My heart hammered so loudly I thought the walls could hear it. He was telling me to leave. Leave the house I had given him. Leave the space I had dreamed of building with him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and remind him of every sacrifice. Every sleepless night I worked overtime. Every penny I saved for his future. But instead, I stood there, stunned, gripping the table edge so I wouldn't collapse. He didn't even wait for my reply. He walked back to his friends, his arm around Claire, laughing as if nothing had just shattered. I stood in that glittering house full of strangers, realizing I was no longer welcome in the life I had built for him. And at that moment, I made a silent vow. If he could erase me so easily, then I could take back what was mine. The housewarming wasn't just the start of his new chapter. It was the start of mine. Because that night, I stopped being the mother who gave endlessly. And I started becoming the woman who would reclaim everything she had lost. Stay with me. Because what happened next was something no one in that mansion ever saw coming. I used to think that a house could hold a family together, that walls and a roof bought with love and sacrifice could make people appreciate the bond they share. But as I stood in the middle of my son's dream house, the one I paid for with every ounce of my savings and trust, I realized I had built more than just a home. I had built a stage for betrayal. The cracks began subtly, hidden beneath polite smiles and rehearsed thank yous. At first, I brushed them aside. A mother always wants to believe the best in her child. But no stage can hide the truth forever. And soon, the performance began to crumble. It started with whispers behind closed doors. Doors I had bought, walls I had plastered with love. I could hear my son and his wife speaking in low voices, their tones sharp, irritated, filled with a bitterness I did not understand. "She's always here," his wife muttered one evening. I was in the kitchen, carefully placing dinner on the table. They thought I couldn't hear. This is supposed to be our house, not hers. My son's voice, low but heavy, responded, I know. But without her, we wouldn't have it at all. Just give it time. Give it time. Those 3 words replayed in my head long after they went upstairs and shut their bedroom door. Give it time for what? For me to disappear? For me to be pushed out of the very house I built for them? The suspicion lodged itself deep inside me, and once suspicion takes root, it grows wild. Asterisk, the first warning came at dinner. I had prepared roast chicken, the way my son loved it growing up, as I placed the platter on the table. His wife's expression tightened. You don't need to cook for us every night, she said curtly. We're capable of feeding ourselves. Her words struck me like cold water. I forced a smile and said, I just wanted to make it feel like home. But she didn't smile back. My son looked down at his plate, silent, as if silence was easier than choosing sides. And in that silence, I realized something devastating. The home I had given them was becoming my prison. Asterisk, days turned into weeks. The tone in the house shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't a guest, nor was I family. I was an intruder. The living room I furnished became their sanctuary, a space where I was no longer welcome. The meals I cooked went untouched. The warmth I tried to spread was met with cold indifference. Then, one evening, I overheard the words, that broke me completely. She's holding us back, his wife said firmly. This is supposed to be our dream house, not hers. You need to tell her to go. My son's reply was quieter this time, but the words pierced through my chest. I know, I'll talk to her. That night, as I lay in the guest room, the room I had once envisioned as a sanctuary for myself when visiting, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. Asterisk, the confrontation didn't take long to arrive. It came one morning as I was pouring myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen. My son walked in, his eyes restless, his jaw tight. Mom, he started, not looking me in the eye. We need to talk. I put the cup down slowly. My heart raced. I already knew what was coming, but hearing it would make it real. This isn't working, he said bluntly. You staying here, being part of this house, it's too much. We need space. You need to leave. The word leave hit me harder than any insult ever could. Leave. From the house I built, from the walls I paid for, from the life I thought I was securing for him. I stared at him, waiting for some sign of hesitation, some flicker of remorse. But his face was cold. His eyes focused on the floor. Is this what you really want? I asked softly. My voice trembled, but I refused to let tears fall. He swallowed hard. It's what's best for us. And in that moment, I understood I was not part of us. I was the problem. I was disposable. Asterisk, I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to reconsider. Instead, I nodded slowly, picked up my coffee, and walked out to the patio. The morning sun shone brightly, mocking the storm raging inside me. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that every signature on the paperwork, every transfer of funds, every contract that brought this dream house into reality was under my name, not his. Not hers. Mine. This wasn't just his dream house. It was my investment, my safety net, my insurance policy. And if he wanted me gone, I would give him exactly what he asked for, but not in the way he expected. Because when a mother is pushed to her breaking point, when gratitude turns into betrayal, when love is spat on and discarded, she doesn't just leave. She takes back everything. Asterisk, and that was the moment the decision sparked in me like wildfire. He thought he had one. He thought he had claimed independence by casting me aside, but the truth was, he had just triggered a storm he wasn't prepared for. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to be thrown away, you know exactly how I felt that morning. That wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my fight. The dream house would not remain theirs. The lesson they were about to learn would change their lives forever. Asterisk, the night it happened. I thought I was walking into a normal family gathering. My son, the same man whose house I had bought with my own blood, sweat, and sacrifices, had invited me over for dinner. I remember standing at the door, holding a bottle of wine I had picked up on my way. It was not expensive, but I thought it was a nice gesture. Something to show I was grateful just to be invited. The moment the door opened, though, I felt it. A chill. Not from the air, but from the way his wife looked at me. She didn't even try to smile. Her eyes, sharp and cold, scanned me like I was an uninvited guest in a home that had once been mine in more ways than one. Come in, she said flatly, stepping aside. My son appeared behind her, his smile tight and forced, as if it was there only because he knew I would notice if it wasn't. The living room was different. cold, modern, expensive decor, but no warmth. No trace of family pictures with me, no evidence of the years I had raised him single-handedly, scraping by to make sure he had everything he needed. My picture, the one I had given him of me holding him as a baby, was gone from the mantel. Instead, his wife's family photos lined the walls. That was the first knife. We sat at the table. The food was plated neatly, her style lavish, excessive, meant to impress, not to nourish. My son barely looked at me, fiddling with his phone, while she sat across from me like a queen guarding her throne. Halfway through the meal, she put her fork down, leaned in, and said the words that sliced through me like glass. "You've overstayed your place in his life. This house is for us, not for you." I froze. My fork hovered in midair. My son didn't flinch. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look ashamed. He just sat there, silent, complicit. It was her voice that rang in my ears. Each word deliberate, cruel, rehearsed. "You gave him money, fine. But that doesn't buy you a seat at our table. You don't belong here anymore." I turned to my son, searching his face for some sign that he disagreed, that this wasn't his plan but all I found was a quiet, hollow expression that said it all. He had let her script this. He had allowed her to erase me from the very life I built for him. That was the second knife. I excused myself from the table, stood up, and walked to the guest room where I had left my coat. As I reached for it, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. I was not meant to hear it, but the words floated clear enough to shatter me completely. "She's going to keep hanging around," his wife hissed, "unless we make it clear. She gave you the money, but now it's ours. She's just baggage." And my son's reply, "You're right, I'll tell her tonight. She can't keep thinking she has any claim here." That was the third knife. I gripped my coat so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest burned, my own flesh and blood. My only son, the boy I had sacrificed every dream for, was preparing to discard me like trash. I walked out before they could stage their little performance. My son called after me, his voice a mix of annoyance and false concern. But I did not stop, not for him, not for anyone. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long moment, trembling, replaying every word, every look. The betrayal wasn't just in what they said. It was in the silence. The silence of a son who chose comfort over loyalty. A son who allowed his wife to strip me of dignity in the home I had given him. That night, I made a decision. I would not confront them in anger. I would not scream or beg for recognition. Instead, I would play the game they thought they had mastered because they had forgotten one thing. The house was still under my name. The power, the papers, the proof, all of it was still mine. They thought they could humiliate me, erase me, discard me. But what they had done was give me the fuel I needed to reclaim what I had foolishly handed over. And I swore in that moment, as I started my car and drove away, that the next time I walked into that house, it would not be as a discarded mother. At their table, it would be as the rightful owner, and they would never see it coming. Asterisk, the betrayal is clear. But the game is only beginning. The papers in my drawer hold more power than my son and his wife could ever imagine. They set me up to fail. But what happens when the woman they underestimated decides to strike back? I remember the night clearly, because silence was louder than thunder in that house. After everything that had been said and done, I could no longer allow myself to sit as an observer in my own life. My son had crossed every boundary, and his arrogance had turned into something more dangerous. Entitlement. Entitlement built on my sacrifices. Entitlement funded by my life's work. And so, I began to plan. Not in whispers, not in vague threats, but in the cold, deliberate strokes of ink against paper. The documents were spread out before me on the oak table I had once polished with care. The same table where my son had celebrated his birthdays, his milestones, his new beginnings. Now, it had become the battlefield of endings. Every page was filled with decisions. Every line carried the weight of betrayal. These were not just papers. These were the chains I was unlocking, the boundaries I was redrawing, the consequences of choices he thought would never return to haunt him. But before I signed, I asked myself one last time, could I truly go through with it? Could a mother turn her back on the child she once rocked to sleep, kissed on scraped knees, prayed for through long nights? And then I remembered the moment he told me to leave. His face cold, his voice sharp, his eyes filled with something I did not recognize. Not love, not gratitude, just calculation, as if I were a number he had already subtracted from his life. That memory burned away the hesitation. So I picked up the pen, and with a steady hand, I signed. The papers held power he never expected me to reclaim. Legal documents that traced every asset back to me. Clauses that had been drafted long ago but never activated. Protections I had put in place not because I mistrusted him, but because I had lived long enough to know the world can change people. That night, my attorney called. His voice was calm but heavy. "You understand what this means?" He said. "Yes," I replied. "It means he learns what it feels like to lose what he never earned." There was a long pause. "Once this is in motion, there is no undoing it. You are not just taking the house back, you are taking everything back." I closed my eyes. The decision was carved in stone inside me. That is exactly the point. Days passed quietly, but beneath that silence was a storm. My son went about his life unaware that the ground under his feet was already cracking. He smiled, he boasted, he entertained guests in a house he thought was his kingdom. A house he had forgotten was built on foundations I laid. Foundations he never paid for. But when the envelope arrived on his doorstep, everything shifted. I was not there to see it, but I imagined the moment, his hands tearing the seal, his eyes scanning the lines. The smirk on his face slowly fading into disbelief, then anger, then fear. He called me, of course. His voice was no longer commanding, no longer filled with authority. It was frantic. "What is this? What are you doing?" "What should have been done the moment you told me to leave," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "I am taking back everything. You cannot do this. You cannot just, I can. And I have." The silence on the other end was long. Then came the anger. "You will regret this. You will regret everything." But his threats no longer reached me. I had already lived through the regret of being betrayed by my own child. There was nothing left he could take from me that I had not already lost. That week, the house he called his home began slipping away. The accounts he thought were his safety nets were drained of my support. Every tie he believed unbreakable was cut clean. And when the realization finally sank in, he came to me. Not with humility, not with shame, but with rage. "You think you can control me," he shouted. "You think you can take everything back and I will just stand here." I looked at him, not as the little boy I once raised, but as the man who had thrown me aside like an old coat. "This is not about control," I said. "This is about consequences. Something you thought you would never face. But here they are, standing at your door." He paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he might break down, show a sliver of the son I once knew. But pride is a heavy mask, and he wore it tightly. "You will regret this," he said again. "No," I replied. "For the first time, I will not." That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Because the papers were not just legal documents, they were a declaration. A line drawn in ink and blood, saying I would no longer allow myself to be cast aside. But deep inside, a question lingered. Would he learn from this? Or would this only harden him further? That was not mine to answer anymore. I had made my choice. He had made his. The rest would unfold as it was meant to. And so, the story continued, each page sharper than the last. Each twist more inevitable than the one before. Because sometimes, the strongest actions are not spoken. They are written. They are signed. They are delivered in silence. Asterisk, I had always thought I was a strong woman. A mother who sacrificed, who endured, who gave everything so her child could rise higher than she ever could. But nothing had prepared me for the day my son turned to me with cold eyes and sharp words that cut deeper than any knife. "Leave," he said, his voice steady, his jaw clenched. "This is my house. You don't belong here anymore." My heart lurched, not just at the words, but at the way he said them. No hesitation. No regret. As if I were a stranger trespassing in his world. I looked around the very house I had poured my soul into. Every wall, every corner carried pieces of me. I had chosen the paint colors, the furniture, the little details that made it a home. I had written checks for every contractor, managed every delay, endured every financial worry just to see it completed for him. And now, here I stood, being pushed out of what I thought would be my legacy. I wanted to scream, to remind him of the nights I worked extra hours just so he could go on school trips. To remind him of the times I skipped meals so he could have seconds. To remind him that this house wasn't built with bricks and cement, but with my blood, sweat, and love. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Are you sure this is what you want?" His wife, standing just behind him, folded her arms and smirked. That expression burned into my memory. A silent triumph, as though she had won some battle I never agreed to fight. "Yes," he said firmly. "We need our own space." We can't keep living under your shadow. This is my life now. His life, his house, his rules. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Asterisk, I walked out, my steps heavy, my chest aching. The door closed behind me, and it was more than just wood meeting its frame. It was the sound of my son closing a chapter on me. I got into my car, sat there in silence, and let the reality sink in. The child I raised had pushed me away from the very gift I had given him. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. I felt stripped of my dignity, cast aside like I had never mattered. But as I sat there, staring at the driveway, something else began to rise inside me. Not tears this time, not despair, but anger. A controlled, burning anger that spread through my veins. How dare he? How dare he throw me out of a house that my money had built? How dare he erase my sacrifices with a single sentence? That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Asterisk, I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. Every mile I covered, my mind replayed his words. Leave. You don't belong. But here is where the twist began to take shape. I remembered something important, something my son and his wife clearly had forgotten. The house was not in his name, it was in mine. Legally, financially. Every paper, every signature, every right tied to that house belonged to me. I had wanted to surprise him later by transferring ownership, by showing him how much faith I had in his future. But now, that gift had dissolved before it could even be unwrapped. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. Asterisk, I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. My voice was steady, controlled, almost chilling. I need you to prepare documents. I said, what kind of documents? He asked, revoking all transfer intentions. I replied, the house remains mine, effective immediately. There was silence for a moment. Then he said, of course. Are you certain? Certain. The word echoed in my head. I had been uncertain for years, always second-guessing whether I was too harsh, too soft, too involved, too distant. But in this moment, certainty wrapped around me like armor. Yes, I said firmly, I am very certain. Asterisk, days later, I returned to the house. Not as a mother hoping to be welcomed, but as the rightful owner. My son opened the door, surprise, etched across his face. Mom, what are you doing here? I held out the papers, what I should have done the moment you told me to leave. His wife snatched the documents from my hand and read quickly, her face draining of color. What is this? She demanded. It's reality, I said coldly. This house is mine. Every wall, every floorboard, every nail belongs to me. And since I no longer feel welcome, neither of you do either. The silence that followed was deafening. My son's face shifted from shock to anger to something almost like fear. You can't do this, he said. Oh, but I can, I replied. And I just did. The house that had been a symbol of my sacrifice was now a battlefield. Their arrogance had turned my gift into a weapon. And now, I was taking back what was mine. As I stood in that living room, watching their faces twist in disbelief, I realized the full weight of my decision. This wasn't just about property. This was about dignity, about reclaiming the respect I had been denied. And at that breaking point, I swore to myself never again would I let anyone, not even my own flesh and blood, make me feel like I did not belong. Asterisk, I turned toward the door, my head high, my voice steady. You wanted me gone. Now it is your turn to leave, and when you step out of this house, remember you pushed me too far. You broke something in me that will never be fixed. And now, I am the one holding the power. Asterisk, the first crack in the illusion came one evening when I received a call I was never supposed to get. A quiet, almost apologetic voice on the other end said, Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you should know about the house you bought. My chest tightened instantly. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, straining to catch every syllable. The caller continued, Your son hasn't been paying the property taxes. The county has sent notices. If nothing is done, this house, the very house you financed, go into foreclosure. The world tilted beneath me. My mind began racing. How was it possible I had given him everything, covered every cost, paid off debts, handed him the dream home he and his wife had insisted was necessary to their future? And yet, here I was being told the very foundation of that dream was crumbling because of neglect or something worse. When I confronted him later that night, his reaction was not of guilt or remorse. No, instead he turned sharp, defensive, even mocking. Why are you snooping into my affairs? This is my house. You don't get to control how I handle it." His words cut deeper than knives. My house? He had the audacity to claim it as if my sacrifice, my years of savings, had no value. I tried to explain the call, the taxes, the risk of losing everything, but he waved me off with a smirk. His wife, sitting smugly beside him, chimed in, "Maybe it's best if you don't get involved anymore. You've already done your part. This is our life now." The way she said "our" felt deliberate, as though she were drawing a line that excluded me entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the halls of my small apartment, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. For so long, I had believed that what I was building was security for him, for us as a family. But the truth was unraveling in front of me. He didn't want my guidance, my wisdom, or even my protection. He wanted my money and nothing more. Days later, another letter arrived in my own mailbox. It wasn't supposed to come to me at all, but the universe has a way of revealing what's hidden. Inside was a legal document and amendment to the deed. My son had tried to transfer ownership fully into his and his wife's names, striking me out entirely. They had planned to erase me as though I never existed. The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just being pushed out of his life emotionally, I was being erased from the very thing I had built with my own blood and sweat. My hands trembled as I clutched the paper. I stared at the cold legal words, every line dripping with betrayal. In that moment, I knew this was no accident. This was a deliberate act. They wanted me gone. Not just out of their house, not just out of their lives, but out of the story completely. And here is where I must tell you the decision I made that night changed everything. It was no longer about love or reconciliation. It was about reclaiming my dignity. If they wanted to erase me, they would discover just how wrong they were. I had built that dream house, and I had the power to take it all back. But the question is, what would you have done in my place? Would you fight fire with fire, or would you walk away and let them choke on their own arrogance? Stay with me, because the choice I made next set the stage for the most shocking confrontation of all. The night began like any other. But I felt the storm brewing long before the first plate was set on the table. My son had invited me to dinner an attempt, he claimed, to smooth things over. I knew better. My instincts told me this wasn't about peace. It was about control. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to stand strong. A deep navy dress, simple pearls around my neck, the kind of outfit that reminded me of who I once was. A woman of dignity, a woman who refused to be diminished. As I stood before the mirror, I whispered to myself, "Tonight, you do not bow. Tonight, you reclaim what is yours." When I arrived at the house, his wife greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. The air inside was thick, suffocating, as though the walls themselves knew what was coming. My son sat at the head of the table, wineglass in hand, looking every bit the master of a kingdom I had built. The arrogance in his posture made my blood run cold. Dinner began with polite chatter, forced laughter, and the clinking of silverware. But beneath it all, there was a tension so sharp you could cut it with a knife. I watched them carefully, the way his wife whispered into his ear, the way he smirked at her words, the way their eyes darted toward me, calculating. Then, halfway through the meal, my son put down his fork, leaned back in his chair, and delivered the blow. "Mother," he said, his tone dripping with false sweetness, "we've decided it's time for you to move on. This house, it belongs to us now. You need to stop holding on to what isn't yours anymore." The room went silent. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to pause, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. But then his wife leaned forward, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "What he means is, you've had your time. Now it's our turn. You should be grateful we're even letting you sit here." My hands tightened around the edge of the table. A storm of emotions crashed inside me: anger, sorrow, disbelief. But above all, there was clarity. This was no longer about misunderstanding or miscommunication. This was war. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Slowly, deliberately. I laid it on the table. Their smug expressions faltered. My son frowned. "What's that?" I slid the folder toward him. "These," I said, my voice steady, "are the original deeds. The ones with my name, the ones you tried to erase." His face paled, his wife's fork clattered against her plate. "You think you can steal from me?" I continued, my voice rising now, strong and unyielding. "You think you can rewrite the story of this house, of my life? Let me tell you something. This house is mine. It always was, and it always will be." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, in a move I'll never forget, his wife stood up, slammed her hands on the table, and hissed, "You don't belong here. This is our future, not yours. You're nothing but a burden we've been forced to carry." Her words ignited something inside me, a fire I didn't know still burned. I rose to my feet, my voice shaking the walls. "A burden? I built this roof over your head. I poured every ounce of my being into giving you comfort, and this is how you repay me." My son pushed back his chair, his face twisted in anger. "Enough. You will not come into my house and speak like this." But I stood taller, stronger, unafraid. "Your house? No, my son. This is still my house. And you will not throw me out of what I created." The confrontation spiraled, words flying like daggers, truths spilling that could never be taken back. Neighbors would later say they heard shouting that night, voices raised in fury, the sound of something breaking, and then something happened that changed everything. His wife, in a moment of pure rage, revealed a secret she never intended to slip. "Do you really think he wanted you here in the first place? He told me long ago he wished you were gone. He said you were nothing but a chain around his neck." My heart shattered, but my resolve solidified. My son didn't deny it. He sat there, silent, eyes cast downward, confirming the truth with his cowardice. That was the moment I knew I couldn't save him. I couldn't save us. But I could save myself, what was rightfully mine. I gathered the folder, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of that house with my head held high. Behind me, I heard his wife screaming, my son calling after me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't, because what I carried with me that night was more powerful than their greed. I carried proof. And with proof comes power. But the question remains, what would you do if your own flesh and blood tried to erase you? Would you fight for justice? Or would you walk away and let them burn in their own betrayal? Stay with me, because what happened next was the most shocking twist of all. The house was quiet the night I made my choice. That kind of silence where even the hum of the refrigerator felt like it was accusing me. I had spent weeks wrestling with my conscience, torn between a mother's unconditional love and a woman's right to dignity. Every corner of that house whispered my sacrifice. The staircase I had paid for, the marble kitchen countertops I had chosen, the chandelier I'd insisted on, telling myself my son deserved the best. And yet, here I was, a stranger in the very place I had built. I stood in the living room, staring at the family photos lining the wall. Most of them didn't even include me. Smiling faces of my son, his wife, their parties, their milestones, and me, erased. The very person who had handed them the keys to this dream. The betrayal cut deeper every time I realized how calculated it had been. This wasn't just thoughtlessness, it was deliberate. I replayed his words in my mind, words that had gutted me like a knife. "Mom, you should leave. This is our home. Now, not yours." I had tried to stay quiet, tried to swallow my pride. But each day I spent under their roof, I felt myself shrinking, like a shadow of the woman I once was. That night, I knew something had to change, so I picked up the folder I had been working on, a folder thick with receipts, legal documents, and evidence. Every payment, every transfer, every paper trail leading back to me. I had been underestimated, written off as the aging mother who would always forgive. But what they didn't realize was that a woman pushed too far finds strength in places. No one expects dot as I slipped the folder into my handbag. I made a promise to myself. I would no longer beg for respect in a house I had built. I would reclaim what was mine. The next morning, the storm began. I walked into the kitchen where my son and his wife were having breakfast. They barely acknowledged me. She sipped her coffee, her nails perfectly manicured, while he scrolled through his phone. No good morning, no warmth, just cold dismissal. I placed the folder on the table deliberately, the sound making them both look up. "What's this?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with annoyance. I leaned forward. Proof. Proof that this house, this dream, was built on my sacrifice. Proof that every inch of this place belongs to me. His wife's smirk faltered for the first time. My son set his phone down, confusion flickering across his face. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he said. I flipped open the folder, page after page, bank transfers from my account, loan documents with my signature, invoices paid under my name. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any scream ever could. His wife's face drained of color. This can't mean anything. The house is in his name now." I locked eyes with her. Names on paper can be challenged. Ownership built on lies can be undone. And I intend to undo it. The silence in the room grew thick. My son looked torn, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words coming out. He had never expected me to fight back. You wouldn't, his wife whispered. I smiled, not kindly, but with the calm certainty of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I already have. By noon, I was sitting across from my lawyer, a kind man who had seen too many family disputes but still managed to treat me with dignity. I handed him the folder. He leafed through it carefully, his eyes widening as he pieced everything together. You've kept detailed records, he said. I had to, I replied. They thought I wouldn't. They thought I'd be too naive, too blinded by love, but I was paying attention. He looked at me thoughtfully. You have a strong case. If you want to pursue this, we can argue not just financial contribution, but also undue influence. You gave him the house under the impression of gratitude and respect, neither of which has been honored. This can be reversed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Do it, I said. Take it all back. The following days were a blur of tension. Papers filed, legal notices delivered. My son's wife stormed into the living room one evening, waving a letter in her hand. How could you? She hissed. Do you know what this will do to us? I met her fury with calm. Do you know what you did to me? You tried to erase me. You made me a guest in the very home I gave you. Actions have consequences. My son stood behind her, silent, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his choices was finally pressing down. You're my mother, he said softly. Why are you doing this? I turned to him, my voice steady. Because I am your mother. And being your mother doesn't mean I have to be your victim. The case grew uglier as it progressed. Secrets surfaced, money misused, lies told to friends and neighbors. My son's wife, once so confident, was now scrambling, her mask slipping. My son, caught between loyalty to his wife and guilt over what he had done, was unraveling before my eyes. But through it all, I stayed firm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my self-worth. Every court date, every meeting with the lawyer, every whispered conversation with people who had once doubted me, it was all part of rewriting my story. The night before the final hearing, I sat in the house one last time. I touched the walls, the furniture, the memories embedded in every corner. I wasn't just fighting for bricks and wood. I was fighting for the respect that should have never been stolen. I thought of all the mothers who had been dismissed, disrespected, taken for granted, and I realized my story wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. The next morning, I walked into the courtroom not as a victim, but as a woman ready to take back everything. And as I sat across from my son and his wife, I knew one truth above all: sometimes the only way to protect your love is to demand your worth. Asterisk, would the court side with me, the mother who built everything, or would they protect the lies my son and his wife had built their lives upon? The answer would shatter everything. Asterisk, I never thought my story would end this way. But perhaps endings are not always neat. Perhaps they are storms that leave you trembling, questioning, yet strangely stronger. I want you to listen closely, because what happened next after I walked away from my son's betrayal will shock you. If you've ever been pushed out of your own family, stay with me. My journey is not just about losses. It's about reclaiming dignity when the people you love most strip it away. The morning after I left the dream house, I woke up in my modest apartment, the one bedroom that had quietly held me together through grief, loneliness, and now betrayal. My body felt heavy, as though I had carried a mountain on my back. But in my chest was something unfamiliar. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was fire. A fire that whispered, no more. I made coffee, sat at my small table, and replayed every moment. His voice telling me I didn't belong. His eyes that had no trace of the boy I raised. His wife standing behind him, silent, almost smirking. They thought I would collapse. They thought I would cry and beg to stay. But I did not. And that silence I carried when I walked away became my weapon. Because silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. That day, I pulled out the box of documents I had kept. Deeds, bank transfers, emails. Every piece of paper that proved one thing. The house was mine, not his. Mine. The truth was in ink and signatures. The truth was undeniable. But here is the twist. They did not know I had planned ahead. I had drawn up clauses in the contract that allowed me to reclaim everything if I was ever permanently excluded from residence without cause. My lawyer had advised me to add it, just in case. I had laughed at the time, never imagining it would come to this. And yet here I was, staring at the very words that would be my salvation. So I called. My lawyer, calmly, directly, I said, it's time. 2 weeks later, I arrived at the house again. This time, not as a mother knocking on her son's door, but as the rightful owner reclaiming what was hers. A moving truck pulled up behind me, and two uniformed men stepped out. My lawyer walked beside me. When my son opened the door, his expression shifted from shock to fury in seconds. "What are you doing here?" he spat, blocking the doorway. I handed him the envelope, read it. He snatched it open, his eyes darting across the page. His face drained of color. His wife appeared at his shoulder, and when she read over his arm, she gasped. "This house is mine again," I said, my voice steady. "And you will leave today." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. My son's jaw clenched, his wife's hands shook, and behind me, the movers began unloading. They protested, they shouted, they tried to argue. But the law was not on their side. Not this time. The lawyer stood firm, every clause ironclad. I had thought ahead, even when I didn't realize it. And in that moment, the balance shifted. I was no longer the mother begging for love. I was the woman who had been underestimated, who now stood unshakable in the ruins of betrayal. I will not lie to you, watching them leave, carrying boxers, rage spilling from their eyes, was not sweet revenge. It was agony. I loved my son. I still do. But love without respect is a prison, and I refused to be its prisoner any longer. When the last of their belongings was gone, I stood in the empty living room of the house. I had bought the house they had tried to claim as their own, and I felt both broken and whole. Broken because the bond between us may never mend. Whole because I finally reclaimed the power they thought I no longer had. So what happened after? I did not keep the house. That might surprise you. But to me, walls and windows meant nothing if they echoed with pain. Instead, I sold it. Every cent I redirected. Some went into charities supporting mothers abandoned by their children. Some into scholarships for young people fighting to rise from nothing. And some I tucked away for myself for the years still ahead of me. Because my life is not over, and neither is yours. To those of you listening who feel small, silenced, or discarded by the very people you gave your soul to, I want you to hear me. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. You may have been betrayed, but you are not defeated. I took back everything, not just the house, not just the money, but my worth. And you can too. So I'll leave you with this. Never hand over the keys to your life completely, not even to the ones you love most. Protect yourself. Stand tall, and when the time comes to choose between surrender and strength, choose strength. Because no one can throw you out of your own story. This was my story. What would you have done in my place? Asterisk, when I look back now, I realize this story was never just about money, or a house, or even betrayal. It was about dignity. About drawing a line where love had been taken for granted too many times. Yes, I paid for my son's dream house. Yes, I believed him when he promised we would build memories inside those walls together. But when he told me to leave, when he looked me in the eye and made it clear that I was no longer welcome, I made a decision. I took back everything, not out of spite, but out of survival. The house is no longer his sanctuary. The life he thought he built on my back is gone. And now he has to face the weight of his choices. But here's the real truth. Betrayal cuts deep, but it also wakes you up. It teaches you that love without respect is nothing but a cage. And sometimes the only way to reclaim your freedom is to take back what you gave, every penny, every sacrifice, every dream you once handed over with open hands. Do I miss my son? Of course. I will always love him. But love does not mean allowing yourself to be disrespected. Love does not mean sitting quietly while your heart is shattered at a dinner table, or in a house you bought but were told to leave. So to anyone watching, I'll say this. Stand tall. Your worth is not measured by what you give, but by how you demand to be treated. Never let anyone, not even your own child, make you feel like a guest in the life you built for them. Because in the end, I may have lost a son's gratitude, but I found something even more powerful. My own voice. My own strength. And that is something no one can take away. Now, I want to ask you if you were in my place. If you had given your child everything and they turned on you, would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have taken back everything like I did? Tell me in the comments. Because this isn't just my story, it's a story that too many parents live in silence. And maybe, just maybe, your answer will give someone else the courage to finally stand up.